Pastor Wayne Riggs, followed by Ian Trowbridge.
Good afternoon. I want to affirm that I'm very much in favor of this medical marijuana task force, but I would urge that you not set a year. In the past 6 months, for instance, in Los Angeles, the number of medical marijuana dispensaries has gone from 500 to over 1,000. So unless you're going to set a moratorium on the establishment of new places, you may want to limit this task force to 6 months. The second thing is I think there was great wisdom in permitting because of the compassionate use of marijuana. I think there was great wisdom in doing that, and I'm not opposed to it. Just as there was wisdom in establishing needle exchange programs. But in the needle exchange programs, we set certain parameters. There are now 4 marijuana dispensaries in North Park. One of them is very close to what used to be North Park Elementary School. It is now going to be an alternative school for youngsters who are not able to stay in traditional schools. This is through the including high school. So having a dispensary now 2 blocks away from an alternative school does not seem like a good notion to me. So I think these guidelines need to be put before the task force, and I think you need a time limit much less than a year for the findings and implementation. Anything short of that is going to create additional problems, I think, for law enforcement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pastor. Ian Trowbridge, followed by Carol Eisman.
Mr. Faulkner, members of the City Council, excuse me, I come here with a unique perspective as a biomedical researcher who knows the value of medical marijuana and can explain the difference between routes of delivery and the effectiveness of a drug. Excuse me.
Take your time, Ian. Did you want to come back, or you want to finish up?
No. I also come here as a caregiver to my wife. I'll come back if you don't.
Take your time, Ian. That's fine, Mr. Trowbridge. It's followed by Carol Eisman, followed by Mr. Gary Smith.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here speaking in favor for several reasons. Number one, if any of you have ever witnessed someone taking chemotherapy and saw what they go through and then see what medical marijuana or what marijuana can do to help them against the nausea, you know that you want to be in favor. Just before I came to this meeting today, I was told that a very, very dear friend of mine has been diagnosed with liver cancer and lung cancer, very far gone, and I am making a suggestion they go down to one of the medical marijuana dispensaries and get it, because he's going to be taking a lot of chemotherapy. Along with approving of the idea of the medical marijuana dispensaries, they do need to be regulated. And they have to be regulated with location. There has to be a CUP. There are other things that can be taken care of. The one person said something about prescriptions or their recommendations. Excuse me, make it just like the pharmacy. When you get a prescription, you have an expiration date or how many refills you can have, and guess what? The pharmacist takes your prescription. So if the person walks in with a recommendation, that person should lose that. They'll have to come back to that same place. But I think all of these issues can be taken care of. It doesn't take a year to do this, guys. Please take a look. As a matter of fact, I think you should also have a resident on the committee, someone whose neighborhood could be impacted, like uptown or downtown, because they are going to go urban. And I would volunteer my services, and I know we could get this done in 90 days. So I really think that something like this is necessary, but we have to regulate it. We have to make sure it isn't near schools, and it isn't near any religious places, but especially the schools. So let's put the task force in place, but let's not carry it out for a year. You know what the problems are. They're easy to be handled and put together. And the sooner you do this, the less problems we're going to have. And I think you need to have a total number that you will decide to have, whether it's going to be 50, whether it's going to be 100, wherever. And maybe per location, per area, you decide how many are going to be. But you need to put a limit on the number, because let's face it, there's reaches a point that there isn't that many people that are going to be beyond having a lot of locations. So let's be reasonable. Let's do it. Let's do it quickly. Thank you very much.
Mr. Trowbridge, you may continue, sir.
I'm sorry. What I wanted to say is my wife died of metastatic breast cancer, and breast cancer, when it metastasizes, goes to the liver, the brain, and the bone marrow. And in the bone marrow, it can cause excruciating pain. We talked about the use of medical marijuana. As it happened, it wasn't necessary. But I think it is important to understand there are real medical uses that can't be substituted by any other sort of drug, not even synthetic cannabis as a pill, because the route of delivery is different. Having said that, I think Carol has given you the best advice possible, so I don't need to say much more. It does need to be regulated, but I do have to say, for the mayor not to send people here is, in my view, outrageous. It's another example of cowardice, just as he chose to decide to outsource DPC because he couldn't win a fight in the city against the unions, so he chose a non-union shop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trowbridge. Mr. Gary Smith.
Good afternoon, Council President Pro Tem Faulkner, Council members, Gary Smith, President of the San Diego Downtown Residents Group. A lot of this is exactly right on point. I'm not going to belabor it all again, except to say, first of all, we need to know whether to call the cops or call code enforcement. If it's a dispensary, theoretically, I guess we ought to call the cops. If it's a collective or collaborative, we ought to call code enforcement. The problem is our land use code right now doesn't say anything about it. And this is where you get in whether it's permitted or whether it's a business license. To have a business license doesn't mean you need a permit. Under the Land Development Code, conditional use permits and neighborhood use permits, Process 1 and Process 2 things, are things that are exceptions to the general rule. Other things are permitted by right. You can just go get a license from the city and go into business tomorrow. We would strongly recommend that whatever alternative you come up with would be a Process 2 CUP, just like it is for liquor stores, just like it is for other uses that can become annoyances in the neighborhoods. Likewise, we think Carol had a very good point in that this panel you're establishing, this task force, ought to have some representatives from the impacted population. Don't care how many, but somebody ought to represent that point of view. It could be somebody from schools. Take your pick. But somebody who has an impact from the neighborhood, not somebody who's looking strictly at the enforcement issues. Secondly, we think a year is way too long. You have the previous task force report sitting on the shelf. You have the state attorney giving you guidance. You have the Senate giving you guidance. You have the state law. Okay, pick it up, sit down. 90 days, you ought to be able to produce a proposal for land development code that says here are the permits required, here are the numbers per census tract, just like with the liquor stores and bars, and be done with it and get some guidance out there that the police can then enforce. Thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Our last speaker will be